1877, the economy was weak. The Civil War caused immense damage to the country and its finances. Both the Confederate and the Union were firing on their own country, which resulted in heavy damage to the buildings and property in the area. After the war, landowners with destruction to their property wanted the government to pay for the devastation, so the government had to pay for millions in wreckage. The government did not just have all this money, so they raised taxes. The raise in taxes took more money from companies, and so the companies had to have wage cuts in order to still turn a profit. The wage cuts hurt the workers the most because now their small pay was turned into barely enough money to live. To make matters worse, the workers weren't being listened to by the railroads, and their rights were being violated when the railroads didn't care about their inhumane working environments. The workers just weren't treated fairly, but one worker had had enough, and others shared his idea.
By shutting down national exchange, the Great Railroad Strike of 1877 forced companies to take on the responsibility of guaranteeing workers' rights, and forced workers to continue to fight for their rights by forcing companies to support the rights of their workers and causing the birth of the modern labor movement, and soon a union. After the Civil War, there was a major growth in railroads, and abnormal amounts of funds were being put into their expansion. However, because railroads needed land grants for land to build tracks, and only the government had enough money to buy them, the government started running out of money, causing a crash in the economy. While the economy crashed, taxes were raised to help the government, which meant wages had to be cut in companies in order for them to not lose money after the company's taxes.
Another reason why the railroads were expanding at such a rapid rate was because thousands of families wanted to move out west where there was plenty of land to settle and explore. But wagon trains were far too dangerous, so the western settlers preferred to use the railroads.
With all of the eager customers, railroads were just as eager to lay tracks across the West, and that land had to be bought and paid for by the government, causing debt, causing more taxing, causing unfair wage cuts. The tectonic plates in the social world were shifting, and an uprise was most imminent in the railroad worker community. Along with wage cuts, workers were not respected, they were overworked, they had no union to back them up, and their work environment was unimaginably treacherous. The steam locomotives could explode from too much air pressure, and the rate of victims getting hit by trains was increasing rapidly. Finally, a worker rebelled. After the railroads had wage cuts, a rebellion took hold.
Often, strikers would protest by forming a mob and throwing rocks at trains, and causing other forms of destruction to railroad equipment. The railroad owners' reaction was violent. They tried to get the military, but the government refused. Instead, local militias were sent to the strikers and slaughtered them. Militias were using guns to kill dozens at a time. The strikers didn't stand a chance.
The sheer brutality of the militias was highlighted in the fact that they went by the motto, "shoot to kill." Strikers who did not agree to leave the premise of the railroads, even when participating in a peaceful protest, were met with local militiamen armed with high-powered rifles aimed at their heads.
That's when things got ugly. Strikers refused to leave, stayed true to their beliefs, and got any type of projectile they could find and threw it at the militiamen. The militiamen fired their rifles in rage, aiming at any striker they could hit. However, this method was proved ineffective in stopping strikers because the strikers knew that these massacres violated their rights of assembly. Using a strict construction of the Constitution, it directly violates their right to assembly, as at first they were just assembling and refusing to leave. But once their lives were threatened by men with rifles, they defended themselves with rocks.
Workers continued to riot and even burned down railroad buildings in many places, but most specifically in Maryland. Mr. Richard McKnight, historian of Steamtown, explains the riots and massacres in the Great Strike.
So, nationwide impacts, would that be similar?
Nationwide impacts were almost identical. I think they were actually worse because this was the energy belt of the Industrial Revolution. And even though the economy was going south, you still had to supply energy for the industries, you still had to provide heat for the cities, and anthracite coal was that. Other places, yes, they had riots, they had to call the military in, made what riot they had here in Scranton look like a picnic.
Other means of striking included workers jumping in front of trains to stop them, not letting any trains leave the stations, and never forgetting the rights they were fighting for so as to fuel them. The railroads denied the rights of the workers countless times, even in the simplest ways, such as cutting wages and maintaining improper working environments.
Wages were cut to an unreasonable amount, and the workers did not like that. However, despite their best efforts, the strike ended about 45 days after it started, when President Hayes sent larger groups of militias to capture strikers, again violating their rights.
Though the strike failed, it was not in vain. This strike led to many other larger strikes, and it even helped to form a more perfect union. They really didn't have unions before the Great Strike, but this strike helped get the modern labor movement going, which not only got them unions, but also helped with the terrible working environments.
The railroads never gave in though, despite all of the protesting. They just hired new people, and without changing the working conditions or paying fair wages. However, the one major change that did come out of the Great Railroad Strike of 1877 was the modern labor movement, a movement that tried to fix the economic and health situations present in many jobs.
Workers in the 1800s did not have a union to support them in conflicts with their employers, but the Great Railroad Strike of 1877 started the modern labor movement, which created unions and gave workers the rights they deserved. Before the strike, working conditions for workers were terrible. Once they earned their money, they had to spend it at the company store and thus barely had enough to live on.
However, railroads have changed quite a bit since the strike. 4-year veteran of SEPTA explained how railroads treat their workers today.
Do you feel respected in your job?
Yes, I do. 99% of the time, yes.
Do you feel SEPTA pays you fair wages?
Very well.
Do you ever feel that SEPTA has ever put your rights in jeopardy?
No, not at all.
Do you feel like SEPTA acknowledges its responsibilities by taking good care of its workers?
Yes, they do.
Do you ever feel too worn out from unnecessary works?
We're a little overworked, but not as unnecessary works there.
Railroads did not just change, though. The strike was unsuccessful. However, it still helped railroads acknowledge that what they were doing was wrong. This also led to many other future strikes. 137 years later, when change was quite evident in everyday railroad activity, the workers are respected and are receiving the proper wages that they deserve.
Local workers for SEPTA, or Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, tell us that they now enjoy their job, are paid more than fair wages, and even have a union to support them if a conflict were to arise. But the strike did not just affect modern-day railroad workers, it affects you too.
If you are part of a union, then your unions would not have existed without the Great Strike. Today, if someone's rights are denied, they sue their employer, their union supports them, and their employer usually has to give them the rights that they deserve.
The railroads completely deprived the workers of their rights, which was more than wrong. It was the railroads' responsibility to guarantee the workers their rights. As soon as militias were called to get rid of peaceful strikers who were practicing their right of assembly, the railroads were denying them their rights. What railroads like SEPTA understand today that railroads didn't understand 137 years ago is that it is not only their duty, but their responsibility to secure their workers' rights every day, 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
But if it wasn't for the Great Strike, companies would be able to ignore their workers and get away with it easily. Because the railroads denied their responsibilities in protecting the workers' rights, the workers rebelled and got the attention of surrounding areas, thus creating the modern labor movement, which made way for modern-day unions that protect all of our rights today.